On the 19th of July, 2018, 31 passengers looked out from their tour bus over the calm, quiet waters of Table Rock Lake in Missouri. Then, after instructing them to hold on tight, the driver swung the wheel and drove the bus down a boat ramp and directly into the water. There was a splash and a roar from the engine, but the vehicle floated. It was, in fact, a specially modified amphibious craft known as a duckboat that was often used for novel land and water sightseeing tours. On this occasion, however, the tour that had just begun would never be completed, and more than half of those on board would not return to land alive. Duckboats were invented during the Second World War, when it became vital for US forces to be able to assault beaches, get troops and transports quickly ashore, and cross rivers and streams without delay. The solution was an amphibious vehicle, one that could traverse both water and dry land with ease. Most US duckboats were manufactured by General Motors, and were given their name because of the manufacturing code of DUKW assigned to them by that company. The D denoted the year of development, 1942. The U indicated that the vehicle was amphibious, and the K and the W indicated that it was four-wheel drive. It was a convenient quirk that this manufacturing code resembled the word duck, an animal that can traverse both water and land. The name duckboat quickly became ubiquitous. American forces made use of around 20,000 duckboats during the Second World War, when they were used in many crucial battles. Nearly 2,000 duckboats saw action during D-Day, carrying troops and supplies onto the beaches of Normandy. They were instrumental in the eventual Allied victory once again in 1945, when they were used to quickly cross the Rhine River as Allied forces closed in on Berlin. Of course, duckboats did not remain a solely American innovation. Other militaries soon noted the design and developed their own variants, and duckboats of various kinds saw use in many theaters throughout the war. After the conflict ended in September 1945, there was no longer a military need for quite so many amphibious vehicles. Some did remain with the army and saw use again during the Korean War in the early 1950s. Many more were, however, sold off as surplus. In 1946, veteran Bob Unger purchased one such surplus duckboat and went into business with his friend Mel Flath. They refurbished the boat and started offering tourists tours along a scenic stretch of the Wisconsin River. The idea was a hit. Uniquely, it allowed for a single tour that took in landmarks inland and on the water, and the transition between the two was novel and quite thrilling for passengers when taken at speed. The original Wisconsin Duck Tour Company expanded rapidly. The concept caught on, and dozens more companies sprang up around the world with similar offerings. Ride the Ducks was founded in Branson, Missouri in 1977 and expanded into numerous other cities across the US. It made use of refurbished World War II duckboats, most of which had been modified to make them longer than they originally were. This increased their capacity and allowed each boat to carry more passengers. These modified vessels were known as stretch ducks. On the 19th of July 2018, multiple duckboats were in operation at the company's Branson location, with tours running back-to-back throughout the day. Just before 6:30 p.m., 31 passengers boarded a duckboat via a modified balcony on the outside of the Ride the Ducks building. This allowed them to step comfortably down into Duckboat 7. Within the boat, rows of seats were arranged in sets of 2 on either side of the bus, next to open windows that could be covered by plastic curtains during inclement weather. Passengers were joined by 2 Ride the Ducks staff, one driver, who would be in charge of the vehicle while on land, and one captain, who would take over when it was time to enter the water. Tours typically involved an overland route along a local road reserved specifically for sightseeing tours, followed by a brisk trip down a boat ramp and into the waters of Table Rock Lake. Boats would complete a 20-minute loop around a scenic island before coming back ashore and returning to their starting point at the Ride the Ducks building. On that day, however, the tour was to be reversed. Managers at Ride the Ducks had been monitoring the weather and knew that a storm was sweeping in. It would bring strong winds that would likely make the lake unsuitable for duck boats. As such, the driver and captain were instructed to alter their usual route and take Duckboat 7 to the water first before completing the land-based portion of the tour. It appears that managers believed this would allow them to be back on land before the storm hit. At just after 6:30 p.m., Duckboat 7 departed and headed straight for the lake. Passengers noticed lightning and cloud on the distant horizon, but were reassured by their driver, who told them that they would not be taking the boat out onto the water if the storm posed an imminent hazard. At 6:55 p.m., the captain took over and delivered a brief safety announcement. This included informing passengers of the location of lifebelts above their head, though the captain made a point of stating that the passengers would not need them. Around this time, one of the staff members also activated a switch that lowered the plastic curtains around the boat to protect against spray and rain. The bus then entered the water with a splash. The lake was calm and there was barely a breath of wind. Despite the clouds on the horizon, all seemed well. Another Ride the Ducks vessel, Duckboat 54, was traversing the lake not far ahead of them. Both duckboats proceeded without issue for several minutes. Then the storm hit, and it did so ferociously. Within a matter of seconds, conditions went from calm and steady to almost out of control. This was, in fact, no ordinary storm, but a weather phenomenon known as a derecho, a broad, powerful front of strong winds that is many miles wide and moves in one direction at very high speed. Both Duckboat 7 and Duckboat 54 turned and started to make their way back to shore. Duckboat 7 was the closest to safety, but it was soon overtaken by Duckboat 54, which had higher gunnels and was thus better equipped to cut through the waves that had suddenly formed on the surface of the lake. Close to their intended landing point on shore, a paddle wheel showboat was struggling to maintain position at its dock. Indeed, its crew had been forced to fire up its engines just to prevent it from being pulled out onto the lake by the storm. Duckboat 54 passed the struggling showboat and made land. Duckboat 7 did not. A short distance from the churning paddle wheel of the showboat, Duckboat 7 listed and started rapidly taking on water. Just seconds later, it sank beneath the waves. The captain just had time to open the plastic curtains on the starboard side before the sinking. He was wearing a life jacket and was swept out of the vessel through the open windscreen by its buoyancy. Left behind were the driver and 31 passengers, the vast majority of whom, per staff instructions, were not yet wearing their lifebelts. As the boat submerged, they were faced with a desperate scramble to find their way out through either the open front windscreen or the open starboard curtain, then fight their way to the surface of the storm-tossed lake. Some made it. Most did not. Those who hesitated to try and grab a life jacket from the rack above their heads may have found them wedged in tight and tangled with one another, inaccessible. Rescuers from the showboat switched off the paddle wheel and threw lines to the surviving passengers as they surfaced. 3 rescuers even entered the water to try and assist, but were quickly swept away into the lake. They survived and were picked up by other boats in the vicinity. In total, the accident took the lives of 17 of the 33 people on board. This included 9 members of a single family, leaving just 2 members of that family alive. The dead were 45-year-old Angela, 1-year-old Arya, 69-year-old Belinda, 76-year-old Irvin, 7-year-old Evan, 40-year-old Glenn, 70-year-old Horace, 2-year-old Maxwell, and 9-year-old Reese, all of the Coleman family, as well as 69-year-old William Asher, 68-year-old Rosemarie Haman, 63-year-old Janice and 65-year-old William Bright, 64-year-old Leslie Dennison, 53-year-old Steve and 15-year-old Lance Smith, and the 73-year-old driver, Bob Williams. In the aftermath of the sinking, the National Transportation Safety Board carried out an investigation and highlighted a number of critical factors. Duckboats were unusual vehicles. They had been designed for use in wartime, and those who built them would never have imagined them being used for tourist purposes more than 70 years later. For this reason, they are not ideally designed for passenger safety. Duckboats can sink extremely quickly when swamped, and also feature a canopy, which can easily trap passengers on board a sinking boat. Tourist duckboats have been modified in a huge variety of ways, and thus may have quirks that affect their maintenance and safe operation. Duckboats are not inherently unsafe, but their unusual nature means that there are risks associated with duckboats that other vessels do not face. This is reflected in a history of accidents involving duckboats, with Ride the Ducks having seen a previous fatal sinking in 1999 that claimed 13 lives. On that occasion, the NTSB had made several recommendations for the continued use of duckboats, including the removal of canopies, which could prevent passengers escaping in the event of a sinking. Now, nearly 20 years after that first accident, the NTSB made the same recommendations again, that canopies on tourist duckboats be removed or modified to allow passengers to quickly escape. It also identified the weather as a factor that contributed significantly to the accident. Staff at Ride the Ducks had ample warning that a storm was incoming. Rather than erring on the side of caution and cancelling the evening's tours, they had rushed to beat the weather, and in doing so risked the lives of everyone on board 2 of their vessels. Individuals working for the company were, after many years of legal proceedings, cleared of any criminal wrongdoing. Numerous civil suits were initiated, and as costs mounted, Ride the Ducks closed its locations one by one until none remained. Today, duckboat tours run by other companies continue to be popular. With every year, our ability to predict the weather and communicate those predictions to tour operators improves. But still there remains a human factor. Technology can allow us to predict when a storm will arrive, but it is still down to the people in charge to act on this information.